Hi, I'm Wilhelmina, and this is a family story. It's called PorkChop. I'm going to let Lori tell you the story in her voice. She was 13 at the time. The story is from the mid-70s, when we were living on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. It's a two-part story. Here's the first part. Enjoy. It was the day before Christmas, and the rain was drizzling down. We were living at Curly Lily Ridge at the time, in the house that Dad built for us there in '73. My kid brother Andy was going to the blind school in Vancouver on the mainland, and Mom and Dad and myself had driven into town to pick him up from the seaplane at the Air West dock and bring him home for the holidays. The four of us were all crowded into the front seat of our little green Datsun pickup. We lived several miles to the south of town and in toward the mountains to the west. To get to our place, we turned off the island highway at Cranberry Avenue and Chase River, and once we had climbed up past Cinnabar Valley, we turned left onto White Rapids Road. After that there were no houses as we climbed 2 more miles up and up to our place. At our place, at the very point where we had to turn left into our driveway, White Rapids Road stopped climbing and started going steeply down. The road bent right there at the peak, and it angled around the cliff that was on the front of our 15 acres. That spot at our turn was a dangerous one. One night later on, when we had a phone, a friend of Mom and Dad's was coming to visit them. His name was Frank, and as he made the left turn onto our driveway, a motorcycle came busting up the hill past the cliff and rammed into the passenger door of his truck. Frank was okay, but we had to phone for an ambulance to come and carry the motorcycle driver away. Mom and Dad always came to a full stop before they turned left onto our driveway. So Dad stopped at the top of White Rapids Road in the drizzling down rain on that day before Christmas. While he was looking for traffic, I looked out the side window, and there, lying under a salal bush, I saw a puppy. "Oh," I cried, "there's a puppy under that salal bush." "Where?" Andy cried, "where?" But by that time, Dad had seen that the road was clear, and he drove across into our driveway, so I couldn't see the puppy anymore. We didn't have a fence around our property, but you couldn't get into our place any other way except through the driveway, because there were young fir trees and arbutus trees growing thickly in that area. Out near the edge of the road were 2 full-grown Douglas fir trees, and our sawdust driveway went in between those 2 trees. Dad kept a thick wire cable strung between those trees to act as a gate. The cable was fastened with a padlock. Dad always kept it locked. You see, our sawdust parking lot was in a natural clearing just behind that first bunch of trees by the road, and our house was way down the hill at the back of the property and out of sight of the parking spot. It took about 5 minutes to walk from the truck to the house. We had a sawdust trail that wound down the slope under the tall trees, and when the sawdust was fresh, we could follow the light color of it to find our way down through the heavy trees in the dark. Once, my Aunt Jane came to visit us after dark, and the sawdust was old, and she got lost in the trees. She had little Davy with her, and she stumbled around through the trees and the wild huckleberry bushes and the prickly-leaved Oregon grape, and she had to holler for quite a while before Dad heard her out there and went out with the flashlight. The reason we kept the cable padlocked was that every once in a while somebody came into the parking lot and stole a truck. We lost 2 trucks out of that spot, the red Datsun, or maybe it was the yellow one, and then later on the green Datsun, which Dad did get back by offering a reward to my friends and by not asking them any questions. After we got the second truck back, he put up the cable. So, on that day before Christmas, Dad had to stop by the locked cable and get out of the truck in the drizzling rain and go and fiddle around to get the padlock opened. And while he was doing that, here came that little puppy, trotting across White Rapids Road. He jumped up into the open door on the driver's side and stood there on the floor, squirming his hindquarters and shaking water all over us. I never saw an animal so wet as that little puppy was. His fur was soaked all the way through to his skin. That wasn't the first time we had found abandoned animals at our place. We were just far enough out in the wilds for people from town to drive out and dump off their unwanted pets. Usually, Mum took them into the SPCA in Harewood. By the time Dad climbed back into the truck, Andy had dragged the pup up onto his lap. It was crowded in the cab, believe me. "Well, well," said Dad, "what have we got here?" "It's a puppy," Andy cried. "A Christmas puppy. It's my Christmas puppy." "It sure is a cute little rascal, isn't it?" Mum said. Dad said, "It looks like it just came out of the washing machine. I guess we ought to take it down to the house and dry it off." We did. It looked a lot bigger after its fur dried out and got fluffed up again. When the pup was dry, I said to Mum, "Can we give it a name, Mum?" "Oh, I don't know," Mum said. "I don't think we should, Laurie. It's going to have to go back to the SPCA, you know." Andy said, "His name is PorkChop, and he's not going to the SPCA. I'm keeping him. He's my Christmas puppy." Dad said, "We don't have to decide about anything right now. The pup will have to be here with us for a few days anyway." It did. The pup had to stay, because the next day was Christmas Eve, and the next day was Christmas, and the day after that was Boxing Day, and then it was Saturday, and then it was Sunday. By Monday, Mum was saying to Dad, "What do you think about PorkChop? Do you think we should keep him?" Dad was saying, "Oh, I don't know. He sure is a cute little rascal, though, isn't he?" Andy was saying, "He's the dog I got for Christmas." Then Mum said, "The SPCA is probably closed all this week, so we might as well keep him here until after New Year's over, don't you think?" Dad said, "Yeah, I think we probably should do that." PorkChop was a cute little rascal. He was mostly brown, and he had the biggest feet I'd ever seen on a dog. And that rear end of his couldn't ever keep still. We'd put out 2 dishes of dog crunchies on the deck, one for PorkChop and one for Susie, our black and white border collie. PorkChop would wolf his dinner down so fast he'd nearly gag on it. And then, before Susie could get 2 or 3 pieces of her crunchies crunched up, PorkChop would be slobbering in Susie's dish and trying to gobble her food down too. "What do you think PorkChop will grow up to be?" I asked Dad. "Oh, he'll be some kind of a German Shepherd cross, I think," Dad said. "If he isn't a bear, he's going to be a big one." By the middle of that week, no one was talking about the SPCA anymore, and I felt pretty sure that PorkChop had been accepted as a permanent member of our household. But I think it was on New Year's Eve that PorkChop committed the unpardonable crime. Dad had built our little wilderness house all by himself, and it had neither a basement nor a foundation. It was set up off the ground on short stilts, made out of peeled logs, so there was an open crawl space under the house. and underneath the floor of the house was padded with thick slabs of pink fiberglass insulation that were pushed up between the 2x4s that the plywood sheets of the floor were nailed down onto. It must have been friction that held the insulation in place. On the afternoon of New Year's Eve, I was bringing a bucket of water up to the house from the well in the lower clearing when I happened to look in under the house. There was the dog we got for Christmas. He was grunting and snorting and cavorting around in a big fluffy pile of pull-down insulation. PorkChop was having as much fun as if he was rolling in a cloud of pink cotton candy. "Oh, PorkChop!" I cried. I knew that his fate was sealed, because PorkChop was not the first puppy to discover how much fun it was to pull down the insulation. We had had another pup that did the same thing, and we knew it was a delight that a dog did not get over. Mom had taken that pup to the SPCA in Harewood. After the holiday was over, Andy flew back to school, and on the following day, my school didn't start for another day, Mum said to me, "Get the leash, Laurie, and bring PorkChop. We're going to town." When we had got to the animal shelter in Harewood, we put PorkChop on the leash and took him inside. The man at the desk said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but we're not the SPCA anymore. We're the city pound now. You live outside the city limits, so we can't take your dog." But I've brought animals here before." "I'm sorry," the man said again, "but I'm not allowed to take your dog." When the man said that, Mom went brick red around the sides of her neck. She didn't say anything, not even goodbye. We stomped out, and she took PorkChop, and we got back into the truck. Mom sat there for a minute, and then she said, more to herself than to me, "I'm not taking PorkChop home. I'll dump him by the side of the road if I have to." I said, "Mom." She said, "Oh, I'm not serious, but what am I going to do?" Then she left PorkChop with me, and she went back inside the pound. She came out and got in the truck and started the motor. Her mouth was pinched into a hard, straight line. She said, "The man says there's a place on East Wellington Road called the Good Hope Animal Shelter. He says they might take him. I bloody well hope so. I phoned, but nobody's answering. We're going to drive out there." The Good Hope was a long way north of town. When we got there, the place looked like it had run out of hope. It was a private house and was painted bright blue, but the paint was peeling badly. Beside the door, a little old, hand-painted sign said, "Good Hope Animal Shelter. Enter." "Come with me, Laurie," Mom said. "Bring PorkChop." The Good Hope lady said to Mum, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I'm all filled up. I have absolutely no more room." Mum looked at the floor for a minute. Then she looked up again. She said in a hard voice, "I'll pay." The lady looked at PorkChop. He was squirming around on the floor, licking at the lady's shoes. She said, "He is a cute little rascal, isn't he? He wouldn't eat much. Maybe I could squeeze him in." Mum gave the lady some money. That was the end of the dog we got for Christmas. But my story about the dog we got on the day before Christmas is not over. Now I'm going to tell you the second part of it. Eventually, our winter rain stopped drizzling down, and after a while spring arrived. The salal bushes came into blossom, and so did the manzanita and the Oregon grape. Little white curly lilies littered our forest floor like fallen stars, and the blue camas blossoms poured themselves like spilled ink over the open spaces around our house. Then one warm and sunny spring Saturday afternoon, I was sitting out by myself and doing my homework on the wooden swinging chair that Dad had built for us up on the little ledge above the house, when I heard children coming down our trail. I looked up the trail, past the twisted Gary oak tree, and there was Fairlight True coming, followed by 3 or 4 assorted little boys, who were followed by 3 or 4 assorted big dogs. Fairlight lived down below our big cliff and farther along White Rapids Road, and she came once in a while to visit my mum. But she didn't come often, because she was just starting school and she wasn't allowed to walk along the road on account of the Crown Zellerback logging trucks that roared past on their way to the Nanaimo Lakes. Fairlight and her mother Janice had moved out our way when Janice married Waldo True, whose folks lived down below our cliff and back some. Then Janice and Waldo had a baby of their own, a boy. At the same time that the baby was born, they bought a St. Bernard dog. They named one of the new arrivals Cisco and the other one Poncho, and I never could get it straight which one was which. The St. Bernard dog, Poncho, or whoever he was as big as a moose, and he liked to lie out on the pavement of White Rapids Road. He was so big that none of the drivers of the logging trucks dared to hit him. He was a beauty, though, all blonde and white, and as friendly as you could ask for. Waldo and Janice had their house in the thick trees, a little bit back from the road, and every once in a while somebody would stop and steal Poncho. But Waldo and Janice always managed to get him back again. So there I was, sitting on the swinging chair with the salal bushes around me dripping with tiny white bell blossoms, and there came Fairlight, in a pretty white dress with a full skirt, and with her long, pale hair swinging loose around her shoulders, looking like someone straight out of a fairy tale book. Fairlight was a good name for her. Fairlight was always as bright as sunshine. That was her little brother behind her, who I think was Cisco, along with 3 of his little friends. Then came the St. Bernard dog, Poncho, I think it was Poncho, and then came a big black Newfoundland dog that was as big as a calf, and then came a couple of other half-grown mongrels that were only as big as large dogs. Waldo and Janice loved dogs. I said, "Hi guys, did you come up along the road?" Fairlight said, "No, we found a path up the side of the cliff." I said, "Do you guys want to have a ride on the swinging chair?" The little boys stepped up onto the platform and hitched themselves up onto the seat opposite me. Fairlight sat beside me, and I pushed with my feet, because I was the only one whose legs were long enough to reach the platform. We swung back and forth for a while, and the boys talked little kids' talk. Poncho, or whoever it was sprawled on the mossy ledge with the other dogs. They looked as though they were lying out on the sunny road, waiting for some logging trucks to come by. Then one of the half-grown mongrels, a brown one, jumped up onto the platform of the swinging chair. He squirmed around so much that the chair was going sideways instead of back and forth. "What's your dog's name?" I asked Cisco. I'm pretty sure he was Cisco. He said, "That's Meatloaf." There was something familiar about Meatloaf. He had the biggest feet I'd ever seen on a dog. I said, "Where'd you get him?" He said, "He's the dog we got for Christmas." I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah." He gave the dog a scratch behind the ears. He said, "Somebody stole him, though, when he was only a puppy." I said, "Is that a fact?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How'd you get him back?" He said, "I don't know." Meatloaf was licking Cisco's face, and Cisco shoved him off the swing. He said, "Mom found him, I guess, somewhere." Fairlight said She found him at the animal shelter, Cisco. Or maybe she said Poncho, I can't remember. Anyway, I didn't say anything more after that. And now I have come to the real ending of my story about PorkChop, the dog we got for Christmas. Did you like it as much as I do? I bet you did. Bye for now, from Wilhelmina.